Welcome back to the PB&J podcast. We have a special guest with us today, Pastor JoAnn Bastien.
Hoot
She is
hoot.
a pastor, yes, of a Nazarene church in southeastern Michigan. She also has a podcast of her own. It's called This Is Her Story. You can find that at thisisherstory.life. She also has a YouTube channel. I'll link it down below. She has some episodes there. And she also has a blog and some more information about her. You can find that at joanncbastien.com. Again, I'll link that down below so you can get all the wording and stuff like that. So, JoAnn, thanks for joining us. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me.
Well, JoAnn, thanks for coming on. It's good to meet you. This is the first time that we've had a chance to meet. I know you and Ben have worked together in the past, but I think, like myself, we have a group of people listening that maybe don't know a lot about you. So I figured we kind of start getting to know you a little bit. So one thing that Ben just mentioned that I had a chance to go back and look through as I was kind of prepping for our interview today was your blog. And it's fairly robust. That thing's extensive. And it's fairly common for pastors, especially pastors I've worked with in my background in the Nazarene church, to have blogs, but it's not common to be as consistent as someone like you. I mean, you guys have up there almost every week. So I guess my first question is how did that start? Because it's a lot. It's good stuff, but I mean, a lot of people just say I don't have the time, but I mean, you're on there every week, like consistently all the time.
Yeah, pretty much. It started like 10 years ago when I planted. So I
Mm-hmm.
kind of wanted to capture the planting journey, the church planting journey. And then but then the last several years, of course, when I started my podcast, that kind of ramped it up even more.
Sure.
Um, but like writing for me is very cathartic. I mean, I journal every day. Like that's like I will do that. If not in the morning, then definitely at night. So it kind of just rolled out of that. And then in the last few years, I'm doing more and more writing, and working on some stuff to be published. So
Oh,
it just kind of helps me process it all. And I don't know. So yeah, I'm really intentional about being on there and getting stuff out there into the world, whatever it
yeah.
is, even if it's lame. But
No, not at all.
the more you
How
write, the better it gets. So
So as a non-writer though, I guess my real question is how do you keep coming up with content? Because I mean, we do this pod weekly, and Ben and I have to like really think about ideas. Ben's a lot more creative than I am, but like, how can you? I mean, there's like several weeks where it's every day. Like, how do you come up with stuff all the time like that?
well, I do the mind dump. You ever done the mind dump thing? So
No.
I don't know if I've heard of that.
you just sit down and you just write down like everything that's like in your mind right now.
Mm.
Whether it's I gotta pick up something from the dry cleaners, we're out of milk, call that person, like you just dump all that stuff. And so the idea is just try to dump as much stuff as you can on paper so it's out of your head for like 5 minutes. And then you can start doing some of your creative work. Because there's this idea that your mind is taking up so much space, trying to keep all of these things in line of like I got to remind you this, I got to remind you this. So because your brain is constantly reminding you of all this stuff, it doesn't have time to do the creative work. So dump all of the tedious stuff that's constantly running through your brain and wearing you down. And so now it has a place where like your brain kind of knows, oh, I have a place where I can go back to this because I've got this list down here, and I can stop thinking about that for a while, and now I can do the creative work. So I'll do that. I try to do that at least once a week, and it helps me with that. And then for Lent, I've been actually just using there's these random word generators out there.
Okay.
And so you can and they'll use them. A lot of times writers use them for writing prompts. And so you just get the one word, and then you're just supposed to just sit down and write nonstop for like 20 minutes about this word. And so whether it's the topic or it's just the starting point for that word, or wherever kind of go wherever you want with it. So a little bit of like Virginia Woolf's stream of consciousness, but not quite as
Oh
dark,
wow.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
So yeah, on that one. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
No,
really
that's really
interesting.
yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's crazy. That's a lot.
Yeah.
I'm like super impressed. I don't know if you noticed, I've never done this before. I was taking notes. It's like, oh, the mind up, open up space for like, open up ideas for creative space. I was like writing notes down here. So first time on the pod is taking notes that are just like personal use. So
Yeah.
we need to have you on like once a month then. I might learn some stuff.
Yeah, I feel like I need to start doing that though, because you're right. Like I even find that myself, where I'm sitting down trying to focus on something, and it's like my mind is constantly trying to remind me of these things.
Right.
And but it's so helpful because one of the things I do is I like have an ongoing to-do list. Uh, and so like sometimes just writing something on there, like, okay, I need to do this, and then it's like it's out of my mind. I don't have to keep reminding myself about it. So that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Um, no, those are good ideas. Uh, and I wonder, like, how often have you experienced where like you feel like you have to force yourself to write, or for you, does it come pretty naturally? Like you're just always writing. Because I know for myself,
Yeah.
like I've been meaning to write a blog post for like several months now, and I just can't get myself to do it. So maybe I'm just
Uh,
lazy or too undisciplined. I
Mind
don't
up,
know.
Ben.
so I'm not quite as disciplined. Like there's some writers and stuff that I follow and bloggers that like I know like they get up at 5 a.m. and from 5 to 6 they just write every single day. That's their thing.
Oh my
And
goodness.
I'm not that when it I'm not like that disciplined. I do get up early, and that's well, one so I can have coffee without anyone bugging me. But that's a whole nother thing. It's a whole
Amen.
nother episode. But like that's when I do like
Yes.
my journaling. So I do more of my praying in my journal.
Hmm.
So than anything else. So just like being real with God and praying that way through writing. Um, so so there's I forgot your question. Sorry.
No, you're
Uh,
fine.
I
yeah.
made
What
that
was my
joke, and then
question?
I'm like, "Oh, no, now I forgot what he said." About consistently writing.
Yeah,
So
like, do you have to force yourself to do it sometimes?
yeah, um, sometimes I do. Like, sometimes I'll go through a spurt where, like, I'll even write a couple of blog posts in a day and then just spread them out.
Hmm.
But and then I'll go through a couple of weeks where I haven't written anything really. I mean, I wrote a couple long Instagram post, but on my blog for I don't know, I think a week or something like that. But um, and some of it just has to do with we were in Flint for board of ministry meetings and all that kind of stuff. So there's just a ton of stuff on my calendar. But like tomorrow, I'm in the office all day. Fridays are usually like my study day, so
Hmm.
I'll just do a bunch of writing, and I will just sit down and just I already have a list of things that I know I want to get to, and so I'll just sit there and write, and I use the Pomodorian. Is that how you say it? I always forget how to say it. You know what I'm talking about?
I don't know if
The
I do.
um
No, that's Pomeranian. What's
yeah.
Pomodorian?
That's what
Not as useful, maybe. I don't
that's a
know.
dog, but I think it's Pomodorian, and so you set a timer and you write for 35 minutes, and then you get up for 5 minutes and walk around,
Oh,
and then then when you come back you do the same thing. You set your timer again for like sometimes people do it 45 minutes. I do
oh.
35 because that's what works better for me.
Is
So
this the Pomodoro
Pomodoro
technique?
technique.
there,
Pomodoro?
see,
Yeah.
I was just
I'm
blending the
taking time.
dog together
You're
with
fine.
all together. But yeah, so yeah, like tomorrow I'll use that, and so I'll write in 35-minute blocks of time.
Hmm.
You know, so and now some of that, like I'll take one 35-minute block, and that will be getting all those those little tedious tasks off. Like I have to respond to somebody's email and
Hmm.
whatever, all those little things that you have to. They only take like 2-3 minutes, but you put them off because whatever for
Yeah.
because
Because you got to think about it when you do it. You can't just do it off
right.
on the side.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But
Yeah. Which actually
anyway,
kind of makes me think of something. This came up a little bit in when Pastor Jake Gregory was filling in for Jordan, and so him and I were talking about what it's like to be a pastor. But hearing you say, describing your technique, it sounds very disciplined. Um, but I wonder, like, how much of that is just your personality, but how much of it is just the nature of being a pastor? Because a pastor's schedule, not that pastors are exclusive in this, but from my experience, like your schedule can so easily be interrupted by a lot of things that it's like you have to be disciplined and okay, no, this is my time to do this, and that's what that time is for. because your attention can just go all over the place. Like, is that similar to your experience and maybe how some of your discipline developed, or is that just your personality?
Um, it's not my personality, no. Uh, I'm I'm an well, I know Ben know, I don't know about Jordan, you know, the Meyer-Briggs. I'm an
Yeah.
INFP. So P
Uh,
means I don't know what it means. Crazy, no planning, whatever. It's not the planning part. It's the fly by the seat of your pants thing.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, it's Saturday. I should write a sermon. So kind of like early on, I'm like, maybe I should have some kind of a routine. And then, when I planted this church, my kids were uh, 11 and 15. So, we're dealing with middle school and high school and all that kind of stuff. So I had to be like,
Hmm.
this is my day that I'm going to just sit down and block out a whole bunch of time. And other, cause you get interrupted and, people are pulling you here and and that kind of, you lose your flow,
Mhm.
And so if I pick a day where I just, mark off a huge chunk of time, I feel like it's enough where you get this flow and this rhythm going.
Mhm.
And then it gets a little bit easier. But yeah, trying to do, I mean, I know people who, that's how they, prep their sermons and stuff like that. When I was driving my kids to school, there's a long story why they went to a different school district. It was 30 minutes one way, and then 30 minutes home. So
Oof.
yeah, uh, it was not a Christian school. It was a public school, but it was a school of choice. Anyway, because I'm introverted, so I'd read the scripture that I was going to preach on that week, and I might have like a couple of thoughts about that scripture. So then I use that time, and so I basically wrote my sermons in my head,
Hmm.
going to driving to school and then drive
hmm.
because I had 30 minutes to do nothing. You might as well do, So I just wrote my
Yeah.
sermons in my head that way, um, and, and then so then when I got back to my office, I could sit down and just dump a bunch of stuff on paper.
Mhm. Yeah. I've had some of those experiences, those long rides, and you're like, oh, there's my sermon right there.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. So, being a mom and being a pastor, what's that experience like? Um, just out of curiosity.
My kids would say, I think they're free labor. uh, it was interesting that because I took them everywhere with what I did, especially once I had planted the church.
Mhm.
So, like, I just dragged them to stuff, um, you know, hospital visits, whatever, wherever I had, you just kind of do. And so, um, yeah, I did a lot of, hey, we're going to church early tonight. You can sit at my office desk and do your homework, and I'm doing this and doing that. So, um, just a lot of them in tow, and you just figure out how to still do it and work around. Um, and I don't mean work around them, but like you figure out how to do your work with them also being there, present
Mm.
with you. Now they were older, so like I wasn't, they could bathe themselves and dress themselves and feed themselves really, for the most part. So I didn't have that part to deal with. I mean, even when I was in my first assignment, um, they were 5 and 9, so they were already school age.
Mm.
Um, so I think you just work around it. And when they're in school is when I would just schedule all that stuff that you can't do with, your kids with you. And so I guess, and maybe that was what early on, I just learned to like plan my week ahead of time. And so I look and say, okay, here's what I need to do this week where I can't really do this with kids in tow. And so just plan it in those blocks of time where I know I have those hours that are free. So I guess some of it is just, but I had to learn. Well, I didn't have to learn because some of that is my personality. But um, like whatever I do this week may not work next week,
Mhm.
and for me that was fine. I don't have a problem with that. So I don't know. Does that answer your question? I'm not really sure, but
Yeah, no, I think so. Like it's a unique perspective that, it brings not just, for your kids to have their mom being a pastor, but also, for you and working in the church and having your kids there with you. Yeah.
yeah, I did a lot of, you're going to volunteer because that's what we do. Well, because that's what we do, right?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's like
It's the
kind of
family
how it's gonna
business.
You're
It's
be.
what we do.
Christians, you're here, you're supposed to volunteer. But then
Yeah.
I'd be like, so what do you want to do? I didn't tell them you're going to volunteer here or there.
Hmm.
But so they got to choose what they wanted. Now when we launched the church, my son's like, well, then I want to, be AV. I want to, be in the sound booth and stuff. I'm like, that's fine. And, my daughter was, she was a tween. So she's just like, I want to hang out with grandma and make coffee. And I think mostly she just wanted to eat the donuts, but she,
Respect.
she pretended she was helping. So yeah.
Yeah.
Well, someone's got
But
to eat them, so
yeah, right.
Right.
He was just testing them.
Yeah,
You can't
it's
test
quality
all of them.
control. It's quality control. Um,
Yeah.
I have a question. I guess this could be for you, JoAnn, but it's also be for you too, Ben, because I wasn't there for you and Jake's pastor podcast, is what I call it. But when we're talking about stuff like this and like it's like quote unquote the family business, from an outsider's perspective, I've always felt really empathetic to pastors, and I've always been really interested in how they balance this, because I just feel like in no other profession there is anything comparable that like your guys' lives is on like public display, like I would say even more intimately than like even like a politician to some extent, because like part of your witness is that family life too, and like kids and spouses just get so sucked into the church itself. And I was just gonna ask how you guys navigate that. If that's too big of a question, like tell me to kick rocks. But like even just as you're describing this, like your kids are like school age. Like when I was like 9 and 10, my biggest concern was like, man, will I get picked last in kickball at recess? Like not like how do I help mom like start a new church? Like it never would have occurred to me. I wouldn't even know what to do. But like AV, what's that stand for? You know what I mean? I don't know if that makes any
uh,
sense. It's a big question.
yeah. So as far as being on display goes, um, yeah, my first assignment was, how do I say this graciously? Because people are going to watch your podcast.
I mean, you don't have to answer. Like that's totally
Wait,
fine,
okay,
man. Like it's
I'll say
cool.
this. My first assignment, the particular congregation where I was, they have very high expectations.
Hmm.
And so I just really tried hard to let my kids be themselves. And, um, and so, you're gonna come to church because, that's what we do, but give them the freedom to say yes and no to certain things. So, if they don't want to go to camp, they don't have to go to camp, that kind of stuff. um, so yeah, we tried really hard to just let them be themselves and, navigate, as you're growing, you're trying to find your own identity and that kind of thing. Um, so I'm like, put on clean clothes and deodorant and brush your teeth and show up. That was kind of like the basics.
That's
Um,
the bar. You need to clear that bar. You know,
Clear that bar and you're doing really well. Um, and but then when I went and planted a church, I think there was a lot more freedom for them. Yeah, and I do think for us it was a big deal. Well, now neither one of us grew up in the church, so um
oh, okay. I bet
so
that's a brand
yeah.
new experience.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're both adult. My husband and I are both adult believer. Like we came to faith in Christ as adults. So
Hmm.
we're already married. So there's a whole we had just a very different approach, I think, maybe to pastors who grew up in the church or were PKs or whatever. But I had heard plenty of horror stories, so it was kind of like we really wanted to be intentional to relieve some of that tension and not have that um, be an issue. And people I work with all pretty much knew, like, my family is off limits, and like if you come from my family, I'm taking the pastor robe off. So, and I'm putting my black belt on. So, it just kind of was like this unspoken,
Hmm.
and and I don't know, and maybe for whatever reason it worked for me, and I was able to do that. But it was important for me to say they're off limits, don't even go there, and people learn pretty quickly. with me that was the case. And so I think it spared them a lot.
Hmm.
And so I guess what I have seen with other pastors is they don't set up that boundary with their families, and they allow the congregation to walk all over them, or to speak terribly to, just like you wouldn't speak to anybody else like that, but you'll
Hmm.
speak to your pastor's spouse or kids like that. And so it only takes once or twice for you to say that's unacceptable, that's inappropriate, and most people will get the hint. um I don't know that, so those are my thoughts. I'm no sorry, Ben, jump in there.
No, you're fine. I was gonna say I really applaud that, like for
Yeah,
real.
that's huge, actually. It's
Because you're right,
very
there is that unspoken expectation on pastors' spouses and kids, especially. Like even hearing you talk like that, I'm thinking back to like when I was a kid and my best friend growing up was a PK. And even I had expectations of what I thought he should do. Like there are some times when I'm like, what? Like you're the pastor's kid. Like, why are you doing this? Because I just wouldn't even think about it because it's like this unspoken rule in the church that the PKs are like free game for everyone, like everyone can have their own
Right.
expectations, no one really talks about it. And so seriously, like you having those boundaries and communicating those, like that's huge. Really, like it's one of my fears with our baby on the way, wondering if I'm going to be a good dad and navigating that, because those, like I can't speak from experience, but I assume it's very difficult sometimes to navigate those. So really hats off to you, and I mean that like in all sincerity.
getting back into this mode. I really appreciate you sharing that. Actually, Joy, that's really cool stuff. I have not heard in my lifetime many pastors talk about raising kids like that, and a lot of my friends growing up, their parents were on staff, and just the pressure that they felt. I was aware of one of my. It wasn't really a friend of mine, but this kid that was in our district was struggling with their sexuality and trying to figure out, where what to whom they may be attracted to, and like the pressure that they had to go through, and that how it became like a public navigation was really really like eye opening for me as a person that was kind of at that point in life questioning their faith. I was just like watching them like that's like, is this healthy? Is this like this okay? Like why
Mm,
are we doing it? And so when I hear like I have a lot of friends that are in the ministry. Ben and I, we worked in a program together where we worked with a lot of people that went into the ministry. And I hear a lot of their stories and I'm just like, that is insane. Like how
Mhm.
do we like let that happen? Like how is it as a church group, we let that happen? And I just was curious, like how you guys navigate it. So I appreciate you sharing that. And I hope that we have people that are listening that aren't in the ministry that maybe like check themselves a little bit,
Right.
because maybe even check me a little bit, like, oh wait, like maybe I need to be really intentional about how I approach if I ever
mm,
have a conversation, because there are actually I serve with sixth grade teens. There's going to be a few staff kids coming up in the next couple of years, and
mm,
that's just not something that I thought about. Like, but now I'm be like, well, maybe I should give them a little extra breathing room because I would naturally give the opposite. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
expect more from them.
yeah,
So
yeah,
anyway, that's cool stuff. Can we? Are you comfortable talking about coming to Christ as an adult?
Yeah.
Okay, because I grew up in the church. My parents, I'll always put it this way: my grandpa, when he used to take us to church, or he used to come to church with us, my parents were so church, and they met at a Free Methodist camp. My grandpa would go around the Nazarene church, shake hands, say, "I'm Louis Bremen Free Methodist." Like I've never not known anybody to not be super Wesleyan, like in my entire life, and super like locked into like either Free Methodist or Nazarene. So having like a really secular perspective was like really interesting because like my wife did not grow up in the church, so um, she does stuff to me that I think is still really weird. And even 5 years in, I'm like, why? Like why would that occur to you? But I guess I just want to ask about that experience. Like one, like how you came like to church, like to Christ, and then transitioning from that, like as a new believer, then growing in your faith, and then becoming a minister. Like I don't know, maybe how that experience has shaped one another. Does that make sense? It's kind of a big question.
Yeah. Well, okay, so I did not grow
Yeah,
up in
a
the
lot.
church. My family's Catholic. My husband's family's Catholic. Um, so my husband's family is Irish Catholic,
hmm.
Mm.
and all the stereotypes apply. Okay, so and then
I will
My
never carry.
family is French Catholic,
Oh boy.
uh, which has its own stereotypes. Uh, and yes, they all apply. So I'm not quite sure how we got together, except apparently I am like 20% Irish, so maybe that's what it is. I don't know.
There you go.
But yeah, so we were raised, but like my family didn't go to church. So when I got second grade, my grandmother's like, those girls need to make their sacraments. so so that was it. Like that's what we did. We went to catechism like on Monday nights during the school year, and that was it. But we didn't go on Sundays. We didn't do any of that other stuff. So and then I happened to be Vatican II came along. Like this is a long answer. I'm sorry. Feel free to edit out
Oh,
whatever you want on
no,
this.
like that's the whole
Um,
thing. Yeah, it's a long
yeah.
form. Yeah, go
So
Yeah.
for it.
Vatican II came in the 70s, and the parish that we were part of was actually doing a new experiment, and so I became I got my last sacrament, which is confirmation, in sixth grade. Usually you do it in eighth grade. So because I made my confirmation in sixth grade, then anyway, my parents ended up getting divorced right after. It wasn't had nothing to do with my confirmation, I'm pretty sure, but they got divorced right after that.
Hmm.
And so like my mom's like, you guys don't have to go to catechism anymore. So we just stopped any kind of so the little bit of influence we had would have been that 1 hour that we had with um, what the evangelical, we would call them Sunday school teachers, right?
Hmm.
Uh, and so that was pretty much gone. And then when my parents got divorced, and any kind of like any kind of um, faith that I had, I mean, it was very thin and minimal, um, just kind of dissolved on its own. And then I had some people in my path, cross my path, who are very outspoken atheists. And this has nothing to do. I'm like pointing fingers at them. I want to
Yeah.
make that clear. As much as it was just, people influence you, and when you're in a vulnerable place, my parents went through a divorce. I'm uh, a young teen. I'm 13. Um, and those were answers that helped me to. Atheism gave me answers that I needed at that time, and so I became an atheist, and that's just that was my life until after my husband and I got married. His oldest brother and so my husband's oldest brother and wife uh, came to faith in Christ at the Methodist Church like 6 months before we got married or something,
Hmm.
and they just started talking to us about Jesus all the time. So like growing up Catholic, we didn't. This is going to sound weird, but we didn't talk about Jesus.
No.
Um, so like, I mean, I knew he was hanging on the cross in, during mass on the, on the above the, because you've been in a Catholic church, right? Like, so
Yeah.
you have the
Yeah.
crucified
Yeah.
Christ, not the risen Christ, right? Um, and so, but we didn't talk about Jesus, so I didn't. It was kind of a weird thing. So they're trying to talk to us about Jesus and talk about how much he loves us and all this stuff, which I gotta give them kudos, because they never, like, they didn't come at us and be like, you're sinning, you're living in sin, you need to stop this. Like, you know what I mean? Like my
Hmm.
husband and I were living together, and um, a bunch of other stuff that I don't want to go into, but not weird
Sure.
stuff, but we were just living our lives.
Yeah.
We weren't Christians.
Hmm.
And so they just kept talking to us about Jesus, and then they gave us a Bible for our first Christmas together, which I thought, oh, that's kind of nice, weird, but also kind of nice. And just put it on my bookshelf with all my other books, because it's a book. That's where it should
Yeah.
go. Um, but then after we got married, so not quite a year after we got married, uh, we bought a house, and I just fell like into this huge, really deep depression. Like now I look back and I know that there was guilt that I was carrying, that I was beginning to feel the conviction of the Holy Spirit. But at that time, I didn't know what it was. And I just fell into a really deep depression, and I quit my job. And I started to make plans to end my life, like get my affairs in order. I mean, it was like fast.
Hmm.
So my husband was riding rodeo at that time. So he rode bareback horses.
Wow.
uh,
Casually. It's like, so chill. You said that.
like,
Like that's not the most exciting job of all time.
yeah.
Like,
Well, he didn't actually get paid for it,
oh, okay. Well,
but
still.
um, he had another. He did tool and die. That was his. That's what he got paid to do. And then he did rodeo, and he paid somebody else to be able to do rodeo. It's kind of like when you run marathons. Like there's some people who make money running marathons, and then there's other people. You know,
That run marathons and that's it. They
right?
just pay a lot of
You
money to do
just
it.
pay. You just pay other people so that you can run, and they track your time for you.
Hmm.
So, like, I'll never be good at promoting marathons, but anyway, he was riding rodeo, and so he was away. It was 4th of July weekend, and I just like that was the weekend. Like I was just gonna um, make it happen. And I remember sitting there Saturday night and just having this weird feeling come over me, like maybe I should try this God thing that my brother-in-law and sister-in-law keep talking about. Like I've tried all this other stuff. I should at least try God too. And so the only thing I knew was Catholic Church, and so that's what I did. On Sunday morning, I got up and I went to Mass, 8 a.m. Mass, and I just went forward and received communion like we would normally. And when I came back and knelt at the pews, I just said, God, I can't do this. So you're just going to have to take my life and you're going to have to fix it because I don't know how to fix it. So whatever you want me to do, wherever you want me to go, whatever you want me to say, like, uh, just take this because I don't know what to do with it. And I kind of like, as an addendum, like, I just said, this, I don't understand who this Jesus person is. And I know he has something to do with you. And so just help me understand that. It was a really weird prayer of salvation, basically. I mean, that was my prayer of salvation. So I went home and I just remember like, wow, like feeling so free. Um, and I always feel like when I tell my story, I feel like I know that there's people out there who they don't get that. Like, you can't just tell people who are experiencing depression, just pray harder. Like
Hmm.
that's, you know, this just happened to be an experience for me that God took me through, and I feel like He was trying to show me something specific of what I needed in my life. Like that was what I needed in order to jump that hurdle of faith. So I came home and decided, well, I knew enough from catechism that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were about Jesus. I knew that much about the Gospels. And so I just started reading in John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And so when I got to verse 14, and it said, and the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us, we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only who comes from the Father, full of grace and truth. Like I remember just stopping and almost holding my breath. And I'm like, I think they're trying to say that Jesus is God. And so I'm like, wait a minute.
Wait,
Well,
time
like,
out.
I'm like, that's weird. So I just went back. Like I kept reading those first 14 verses over, and I said to myself, JoAnn, you know nothing about the Bible. You should read that again, and maybe you should call somebody. It's like that cannot be what they're saying. That can't be
Hmm.
what they're saying. Um, so I just had this weird, like the Spirit just totally opened my eyes and like could not stop reading John's Gospel. Um, got to the end of John and went like just started over in Matthew and just started like reading. And so like the next week just basically read through the New Testament, and just couldn't stop. Um, and so there was this like the Spirit just did something in me that like gave me a voracious appetite for the word. But in particular, I think it was that part in John's gospel, especially verse 14, um, this idea that there were people who saw him and touched him and looked in his eyes and actually heard his voice with their own ears, and sat around campfires together. That just radically blew my mind
Hmm.
because this idea that God would be so tangible that we could stand there and hold his hand or look him in the eye, um, was it was powerful for me, and it became transforming. Um, and so what happened was my conversion was like fast. Like, like my husband comes home from rodeo and he's like, "What happened to you?" Like that kind of overnight thing of, I
Wow.
left, you were an atheist, I come back, you're like joining a church. This is weird. Um, so anyway, it just kind of went fast because you're like, how did I get then to becoming a pastor?
Mhm.
So I actually worshipped in the Catholic Church as we'd call it, right, evangelicals, we'd say born again believer, for 4 years. And my husband's like, I don't want to have anything to do with the Catholic Church.
Hmm.
I believe in God. That's great that you had this experience. That's awesome. You do your thing. I'll do my thing. And so, like, spiritually, we live completely different lives for like 4 years. And we had a child in that time. And so then we ended up in the Nazarene church kind of by accident. My husband's young. There's 4 boys in my husband's family. So the oldest one, they were really instrumental in leading me to Christ. Then the youngest one started dating a gal who was Lutheran, but got saved at a Nazarene camp meeting.
What?
Wesleyans,
Okay.
man, we know how to get it
Yeah,
done.
Just
man, what's wrong with them? So she's like, I'm going to go to the Nazarene church. If you're going to date, you're going to go with me. So they start going to this Nazarene church. So my husband's younger brother says to him, well, maybe you should come to this church if you don't want to go to the Catholic church. So we all end up at this Nazarene church together. And for 6 months, we're going to this church, and I'm telling everybody, well, we're going to this non-denominational church.
Oh no.
Because I didn't know Nazarene was a denomination. Like, look, I was Catholic. There were Catholics, Lutherans, and everybody else was Baptist. That's how my mind worked, right?
Fair
So
enough.
I'm like, oh, cool, I get it. He will be called a Nazarene.
oh man,
You
that's
know,
amazing.
like in the church, because we have Our Lady of Sorrows, Our Lady of Good Counsel, Christ the Shepherd Catholic Church. Like, we've got weird names.
Mhm.
We don't go with St. Paul, and St. Mark. Like, I mean, I guess we do have like St. Michael, but we have St. John Benedict, right? Who names their church St. John Benedict except the Catholics? So I'm like, oh well, maybe they just took a page out of the Catholic book and they're like, oh, Church of the Nazarene. I get it, like so
Gonna roll with it.
yeah. And I'm like, finally, I'm like, does this church have like, are you guys associated with any kind of a denomination? They're like, we're Nazarene. I'm like, okay, what is
You
that?
don't say.
Like, we're like Methodist, but without the robes. So,
It's
anyway,
Methodist, but cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we're cool. We wear suits instead, uh, suits and ties. Um, so okay, I'm gonna stop there. If you want to know any more about my call and stuff, you can just tell me. But
No,
that's
that
how I
was
ended
awesome.
up there.
No, that was
Yeah.
awesome. That was a really good story, and the humor element, it was really great.
I do find it interesting that in your husband's family, and including you, it's people from the Wesleyan traditions that get people saved.
Yeah.
I just thought that was an interesting point there. Um,
It's purely by coincidence. No bias in this presentation at all.
yeah, no, none at all,
So,
none at
so I
all, none at
talked
all.
Yeah.
to two Nazarene pastors. Yeah, sure.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, JoAnn, for joining us for this podcast. And for those listening, if you liked this, be sure to leave a like. Be sure to share and subscribe. That will really help us out. And let us know what you thought about this. Do you agree with some of what we said? Do you disagree with it? Let us know. And also let us know your ideas of what you'd like to hear us talk about. And we really enjoyed having you here to listen in. And we will see you next time.